On a foggy morning, the old blue jacket came back. For years after my husband went missing, a dog brought me the jacket he was wearing on the day he disappeared. It felt like a dream when I saw the strange dog standing at my door, carrying the jacket of the one who disappeared 4 years ago. But the story doesn't end there. This jacket holds a cryptic message that I can't ignore. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. No more waiting. The story begins right now. The morning fog rolled thick across my front porch, much like it had that October day when Jack left for his usual hiking trip in the Rocky Mountains. I was pouring my morning coffee, still 2 cups, even after all this time, when I saw the dog. He was a large shepherd mix, lean but not starving, with intelligent eyes that seemed to carry the weight of secrets. What caught my attention wasn't his appearance, though. It was what hung from his mouth. A weathered blue Gore-Tex jacket, frayed at the edges but unmistakable. I dropped my coffee mug, barely registering the sound of ceramic shattering on the wooden floor. That jacket had been Jack's favorite. He'd worn it the day he disappeared. My hands trembled as I opened the screen door. The dog didn't run. He stood there stock still, those knowing eyes fixed on mine. Behind him, the dense woods that had swallowed my husband 4 years ago seemed to hold its breath. "Hey there," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Where did you get that?" The shepherd took one step forward, then another, until he was close enough for me to see the mud caked on his paws and the burrs tangled in his fur. He'd come a long way. As I reached for the jacket, memories flooded back. Jack pulling it on that morning, kissing me goodbye, promising to be back before dark. The 3 days of searching that followed. The rescue teams combing the mountains. The helicopters. The eventual devastating shift from rescue to recovery. And finally, the empty funeral with an empty casket because the mountains had kept their secret. Until now. The dog released the jacket into my hands and sat down, as if his mission was accomplished, but his story wasn't finished. I sank to the porch steps, clutching the familiar fabric. A small piece of paper fluttered from one of the pockets. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the paper. It was Jack's handwriting, but the ink had faded and water damage made parts nearly illegible. "My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, I'm in trouble. Followed the wrong trail. Cave system. Deeper than coordinates." The rest was too smudged to read, except for the last line. "I love you, always." I pressed the jacket to my face, inhaling deeply. Beneath the musty scent of earth and decay, there was still a trace of Jack cologne. The sandalwood one I'd given him for our last anniversary. The dog whined softly, nudging my hand with his nose. "Where did you come from?" I asked, noticing a worn leather collar beneath his thick fur. The tags were missing, but something about him seemed vaguely familiar. That's when it hit me. For years ago, during the search, there had been reports of a stray shepherd hanging around the rescue teams. Some of the volunteers had tried to catch him, thinking he might lead them to Jack, but the dog had always stayed just out of reach, watching from the tree line. I stood up, jacket clutched to my chest. "Would you like to come inside?" The dog followed me into the kitchen, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors. While I cleaned up the broken coffee mug, he sat patiently, those amber eyes never leaving my face. There was something almost human in his gaze, an intelligence that made me wonder just how much he knew. I called David Martinez, the lead detective who'd handled Jack's case. He'd retired last year, but he'd given me his personal number, telling me to call if I ever needed anything. The phone rang 4 times before his familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Sophia, everything okay?" "The jacket, David. Someone found Jack's jacket." There was a long pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes." While I waited, I examined the jacket more carefully. Apart from being weathered, it was largely intact. No tears suggesting an animal attack, no bloodstains. The zipper still worked. In the pockets, I found Jack's chapstick, a granola bar wrapper, and his old compass, the needle still pointing stubbornly north. The dog watched my investigation, occasionally tilting his head as if trying to communicate something important. When I found myself talking to him, explaining about Jack in that terrible day, he listened with such focused attention that it almost felt like having a conversation. He wasn't just my husband, I told the dog, wiping away tears. He was my best friend. We met in college, both studying environmental science. He used to joke that he fell in love with me during our first geology field trip, when I could identify metamorphic rocks faster than our professor. The dog's ears perked up at the word rocks, and he let out a soft bark. "What is it, boy? Do you know something about—" A knock at the door interrupted my question. David Martinez stood on my porch, looking exactly as I remembered: salt and pepper hair, kind eyes, and the slight limp from an old injury. His eyebrows rose when he saw the dog. "Well, well," he said softly. "Look who finally decided to come down from the mountain." "You know this dog?" I asked, watching as David knelt down despite his bad knee. The shepherd approached him cautiously but without fear. "Not exactly," David said, examining the worn collar. "But every search and rescue team in the area knows about him. They call him the Mountain Guardian. He's been spotted helping lost hikers find their way back to trails for years. Some say he was originally a rescue dog who lost his handler." David stood with a grunt, his eyes fixing on the jacket I still clutched. "May I?" I handed it over, watching as he examined it with the methodical precision that had made him one of the best detectives in the county. His fingers traced the seams, checked the pockets, studied the wear patterns. "Sophia, this jacket, it hasn't been out there for 4 years." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Look at the degradation pattern. This material, even with exposure, should be much more deteriorated after 4 years in the elements. I'd say this has been exposed for months, maybe a year at most." I sank into my kitchen chair, the implications making my head spin. The dog moved to my side, resting his head on my knee as if offering comfort. But that would mean that wherever Jack was, this jacket was protected from the elements for at least 3 years. David finished. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through old case files. "You mentioned a note and coordinates." I handed him the water damage paper. While he studied it, I found myself running my fingers through the dog's thick fur, drawing strength from his solid presence. "There was always something that bothered me about this case," David said finally. "The search area, we focused on the main trails because that's where Jack said he was going. But when we found his car, it was parked near the Copper Hollow mine, the one that was sealed off in the 90s? Exactly. Jack was an environmental scientist. What if he wasn't just hiking that day? What if he was investigating something? The dog suddenly stood, ears forward, and trotted to the front door. He looked back at us expectantly. "I think," David said slowly, "he wants us to follow him." I grabbed Jack's jacket, my hiking boots, and a flashlight. Part of me wanted to race out the door, to finally uncover the truth that had haunted me for 4 years. But another part was terrified of what we might find. "Sophia," David caught my arm. "Are you sure you want to do this? Sometimes the truth isn't what we hope for." I looked at the shepherd waiting patiently by the door, then at the jacket in my hands. "Jack is out there somewhere, David. He left me a message, and this dog, he's trying to tell us something. I have to know." David nodded, pulling out his phone to call for backup. As he made arrangements with the current search and rescue team, I packed a small backpack with water, first aid supplies, and Jack's old GPS unit. The dog watched me prepare, those intelligent eyes following every movement. When I was ready, he let out a soft woof and headed down the porch steps toward the tree line. Just before we entered the forest, I looked back at our house, the home Jack and I had shared, the porch where we'd spent countless evenings watching the sun set over the mountains. For years of questions, of grief, of wondering. "I'm coming, Jack," I whispered. "Hold on." The dog led the way into the woods, his tail held high like a beacon. Behind us, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The dog moved with purpose, following what seemed to be an invisible trail through the dense forest. David kept pace behind me, occasionally marking our route on his GPS. The morning fog had lifted, but dark clouds loomed overhead, promising rain. "He's taking us toward Devil's Backbone," David observed, referring to the rocky ridge that local hikers usually avoided. "The old mining tunnels run deep under this whole area. I clutched Jack's jacket closer. The last time I'd been on these trails was during the search, when hope still burned bright and every snapped twig could have been a sign. Now, for years later, the forest felt different, less threatening, more like it was finally ready to reveal its secrets. The shepherd stopped suddenly, nose twitching. He veered off the main trail, leading us through a thicket of mountain laurel to a clearing I'd never seen before. There, half hidden by vegetation, was a rock face with a dark opening at its base. "This isn't on any of our maps," David said, frowning. He pulled out his phone, but there was no signal. The old mining records showed all the entrances were sealed. The dog barked once, sharp and clear, the sound echoing off the rocks. He trotted to the opening and looked back at us expectantly. "Wait," I said, something clicking in my mind. I pulled out Jack's old compass, the one from his jacket pocket. The needle spun wildly, just like it would near significant mineral deposits. "David, what if Jack found something here? Something important enough to investigate?" Thunder rumbled in the distance as David examined the opening. "There are fresh marks on these rocks," he said, running his fingers along the edge. "Someone's been here recently." My heart pounded. Recently enough to leave a jacket? Before David could answer, the dog disappeared into the opening. Without hesitation, I clicked on my flashlight and followed. The beam caught glimpses of old support beams, mining cart tracks half buried in debris, and boot prints in the dusty floor. "Sophia, wait," David called. But I was already moving deeper into the tunnel. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of wet earth and something metallic. The dog's white tail glowed in my flashlight beam, leading us deeper into the mountain's heart. The tunnel branched several times, but our guide never hesitated. At one junction, I noticed modern climbing rope tied to an old support beam. Someone had definitely been here recently. "Look," David said, his flashlight beam highlighting a section of wall. There were fresh tool marks in the rock and what looked like sampling bags scattered nearby. "This is recent geological survey work." Suddenly, the dog froze, hackles rising. A sound echoed through the tunnels, not falling rocks or dripping water, but something else, something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was music, faint, tinny music, like from a radio running on dying batteries. The same song that had been playing in our kitchen the morning Jack disappeared. My hands shook as I steadied myself against the tunnel wall. The music Louis Armstrong's "What a Wonderful World" drifted through the darkness like a ghost. Jack had been singing it that morning, teasing me about my terrible dancing as we made breakfast. "Sophia," David's voice was tight with concern. "Maybe we should wait for backup." But the dog was already moving toward the music, and my feet followed as if pulled by an invisible thread. The tunnel widened into what appeared to be an old mining chamber. Our flashlight beams revealed modern equipment scattered about, geological testing tools, a battery-powered lantern, empty water bottles, and there, propped against a rock wall, was a small portable radio. The dog padded over to a narrow crevice in the far wall, pawing at the ground. David's flashlight beam caught something metallic, a professional climbing harness, partially buried under fallen rocks. Jack, his name escaped my lips in a whisper. The evidence of his presence here, after all these years, made my knees weak. He was studying something in these caves, something he didn't want others to know about. David was examining the climbing gear. "This setup, it's for descending. There must be a shaft somewhere nearby." As if in response, the dog barked, the sound echoing off the chamber walls. He stood by a dark opening we hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind old mining equipment. When we approached, we could feel a distinct draft of cold air rising from below. David shone his flashlight down the shaft. The beam disappeared into darkness, but we could hear the distant sound of running water. "There's an underground river system down there." I said, my geologist mind racing. Jack had been talking about unusual mineral formations in the area, patterns that didn't match known geological surveys. He thought there might be a crash of thunder from above cut off my words, followed by the distant sound of rain. The dog whined urgently. "We need to make a decision," David said, checking his watch. "The rescue team won't reach us for at least another hour, and if that rain gets heavy, these tunnels could flood." I was already pulling on Jack's jacket, checking the pockets one last time. My fingers found something I'd missed before, A small USB drive protected in a waterproof case. David, look at this. I handed him the drive. He left this for someone to find. He must have known another rumble of thunder. Closer this time, water began to trickle down one of the tunnel walls. The dog barked again, more insistent now. He seemed torn between the shaft opening and the tunnel leading back to safety. There's more climbing gear here, David said, shining his light on a coil of rope and carabiners. But Sophia, this is crazy. We need to wait for the rescue team. I was already checking the climbing harness we'd found. It was Jack's size, but there was a second, smaller one nearby my size. He knew I'd come looking, I said softly. He knew I'd figure it out. Eventually, the dog pressed against my leg, looking up at me with those knowing eyes. In that moment, I made my decision. David, take the USB drive and the radio back to the surface. Get it to the authorities. If something happens, at least there'll be evidence of what Jack found. Sophia, number can't let you. I'm not asking permission. I was already securing the harness around my waist, checking the anchors Jack had set years ago. They were professional grade, designed to last. That dog didn't bring me Jack's jacket just to lead me this far. There's something down there, something Jack thought was worth risking everything for. The rain was falling harder now, the sound echoing through the tunnels like distant drums. David looked at me, then at the dog, then back at the tunnel leading to safety. 1 hour, he said finally. If you're not back in 1 hour, I'm bringing the whole rescue team down here. Floods or no floods. I hugged him quickly, then turned to the shaft. The dog sat calmly beside me as I prepared the rope system. Are you coming with me, boy? His tail wagged once, and he moved closer to the edge. As I prepared to descend into the darkness, Jack's voice seemed to echo in my memory. Sometimes the biggest discoveries aren't what you find, but what finds you. I took a deep breath and began my descent into the mountain secrets. The descent seemed endless. The beam of my headlamp disappeared into the void below, while the sound of rushing water grew louder. Somehow the dog managed to pick his way down alongside me, using narrow ledges I hadn't even noticed. His eyes glowed eerily in the reflected light. 30 feet down, the shaft opened into another chamber. This one clearly not man-made. Massive crystalline formations sparkled in my headlamp's beam. Unlike anything I'd seen in my years as a geologist, the dog's claws clicked against the mineral floor as he led me deeper into the cavern. "Oh my God, Jack," I whispered. "You found it." The formations weren't just beautiful, they were impossible. The mineral structure suggested extreme pressure conditions that shouldn't exist at this depth. If what I was seeing was real, it would rewrite geology textbooks. That's when I saw the camp. Tucked into a natural alcove was a small tent, surrounded by scientific equipment. Solar-powered batteries connected to deep cave lighting systems. A makeshift desk held notebooks filled with Jack's familiar handwriting. Everything was covered in a fine layer of crystal dust, but otherwise preserved in the cave's constant temperature. My hands trembled as I opened the most recent notebook. Day 147. The crystalline formations continue to defy explanation. The energy readings are off the charts. If my calculations are correct, the mineral composition could revolutionize energy storage. But someone else knows. I've heard them in the upper tunnels at night. Have to protect the site. Have to get word to Sophia. The dog whined suddenly, drawing my attention to another passage leading off the main chamber. As I followed him, the rushing water sound grew louder. The passage opened onto an underground river, its black waters churning past with frightening speed. That's when my headlamp caught something that made my blood freeze. Another tent, newer than Jack's, on the opposite bank, and fresh boot prints in the crystalline sand. "Well, well," a voice echoed from behind me. "I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out." I turned slowly. A man stood in the passage we'd just come through, pointing a flashlight at my face. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows. "Dr. Sophia Morrison," the man said. "Your husband's research notes mentioned you'd be clever enough to find this place eventually, though I admit we didn't expect the dog to be quite so helpful." The shepherd growled low in his throat, positioning himself between me and the strangers. "Who are you?" I asked, though I already had a sinking suspicion. "Let's just say we represent certain interests that would prefer this discovery remain private. Your husband was rather uncooperative about that." My heart pounded. Where is he? The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Why don't you come with us? I believe it's time for a family reunion. The dog's growl deepened, echoing off the cave walls. I felt for the wall behind me, mind racing. Jack's last notebook entry suddenly made terrible sense. He hadn't gotten lost. He'd been hiding for years. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You've kept him here for 4 years. The leader's laugh was cold. Not exactly. Dr. Morrison proved quite resilient at first, refused to share his research, insisted on proper channels, threatened to expose everything. Then we discovered his weakness. He gestured at me. You! The dog inched forward, hackles raised. The 2 men behind their leader shifted nervously. Boss, one muttered. That's the cave dog, the one we could never catch, the one that kept leading hikers to the upper entrance. The other added. Maybe we should shut up, the leader snapped. Dr. Morrison's wife is our ticket to getting him to finally cooperate. The dog's just a stray, but I was watching the shepherd more carefully now. The way he moved, the intelligent focus in his eyes. And suddenly I remembered something Jack had told me years ago. Dogs are family, Sophia. They never give up on the people they love. Before anyone could react, I reached into Jack's jacket pocket and pulled out his old emergency whistle. The sharp blast echoed through the cavern like a gunshot. Several things happened at once. The dog launched himself at the leader, a blur of fur and fury from somewhere deeper in the cave system. Answering whistles echoed, and a familiar voice, older, rougher, but unmistakable, shouted my name. Sophia down! I dropped as a flood of light filled the chamber. Search and rescue teams poured in from multiple passages, led by David Martinez, and what looked like federal agents, FBI on the ground, hands where we can see them. The 3 men were quickly overwhelmed. As they were being cuffed, I saw movement from one of the deeper tunnels. A figure emerged, leaning heavily on a makeshift cane, his beard gray, but his eyes exactly as I remembered them. Jack. He was thinner, older, his hair streaked with silver, but his smile was the same. The dog, our dog, bounded between us, tail wagging furiously. I'm so sorry, Sophia, Jack said as I ran to him. They threatened to hurt you if I went public. I had to protect you, protect the discovery, but I knew you'd figure it out eventually. And Buddy here, he scratched the shepherd's ears. He never gave up on getting help. Much. I looked at the dog in surprise. My research partner before all this, when they trapped me down here, he escaped and playing guardian angel ever since, helping lost hikers, keeping an eye on you. Jack's voice broke. He brought you my jacket when he knew it was finally safe. Didn't you, boy? Buddy barked, pressing against both of us as Jack pulled me close. David approached, looking pleased despite his worry. Jack's coded messages on that USB drive helped us track down the whole organization. Corporate espionage, kidnapping, illegal mining operations. They'll be going away for a long time. The mineral deposits. I asked Jack, safe now, and going to be studied the right way through proper channels. He squeezed my hand. But first, I believe I owe you about 4 years of making up for lost time, as the rescue team secured the scene and documented the incredible crystal formations. Jack, Buddy, and I began our long ascent back to the surface. The storm had passed and sunshine streamed through the cave entrance. The same entrance Buddy had led me to, carrying a jacket full of hope and secrets. Welcome home, I whispered, helping Jack into the sunlight. Buddy barked happily, leading the way back down the mountain path toward our house, where 2 coffee cups would finally have a purpose again. Epilogue: 1 year later, I stand on our back porch, watching Jack and Buddy play fetch in the late afternoon sun. Jack's limp is barely noticeable now, though he still uses a cane on cold days. Buddy, officially our dog, now has grown plump and happy, though he still patrols the property line each night. Ever the guardian. The Crystal Cave discovery changed everything, not just our lives. Jack's research, now properly documented and peer-reviewed, revolutionized energy storage technology. The cave itself became a protected scientific site with universities worldwide, sending researchers to study its unique formations. But the real healing happened in smaller moments, like the night Jack finally told me everything. how he'd survived in the cave system, using his geological knowledge to find safe water and hiding places. How Buddy had brought him food and supplies. How he'd maintained hope by writing me letters he couldn't send. "I talk to you every day," he'd confessed, sitting on this very porch. "Told you about the crystals, the cave formations, my theories. Somehow I knew you'd hear me eventually." The corporate executives who'd orchestrated his kidnapping were sentenced last month. Jack insisted on attending the trial, standing tall as he testified. Buddy lay at his feet the entire time, a steady presence, just as he'd been through all those years in the cave. Coffee. Jack calls from inside, pulling me from my thoughts. He still makes enough for two, but now we actually share it. "Coming?" I answer, smiling as Buddy bounds up the porch steps ahead of me. He's carrying Jack's old blue jacket. It's become his favorite toy, though we had to wash it first. Sometimes he still brings it to us, as if reminding us how he helped bring our family back together. Inside, Jack is organizing his research notes. The university asked him to write a book about his discovery, both the scientific aspects and the human story. A tale of two sciences. He's calling it geology and loyalty, minerals and love. "You know what today is?" he asks, handing me my coffee. "Thursday," he shakes his head, grinning. "1 year since Buddy brought you my jacket. 1 year since you followed an old dog into a cave and found me." Buddy's tail thumps against the floor at the mention of his name. He's graying around the muzzle now, but his eyes are as bright as ever. "I've been thinking," Jack continues, "about mysteries and faith, about how sometimes the things we can't explain scientifically are the most important ones." "Like a dog who never gave up?" I ask, scratching Buddy's ears. "Like a wife who never stopped looking?" Jack corrects, pulling me close. "And a love that even 4 years underground couldn't dim." Outside, the mountains rise against the evening sky, their secrets now a little less mysterious. Buddy gets up and goes to the door, ready for his evening patrol. But now he doesn't go alone, Jack, and I walk with him, our little family complete again, following the paths that led us back to each other. Some say it was science that saved Jack, the geology that helped him survive, the evidence that brought down his captors. Others say it was love, my refusal to give up, Buddy's unwavering loyalty. I think it was both. After all, the most powerful forces in nature work in harmony, like the pressure and time that created those impossible crystals. Like the patience and devotion that brought a dog to my doorstep with a weathered blue jacket, leading me back to the heart I'd lost. "Ready for our walk?" Jack asks, holding out his hand. Buddy barks once, and together we step into the evening light, following our faithful guide down the familiar trail, making new memories to replace the lost years. Some mysteries I've learned don't need to be solved. They just need to be believed in. Like the love between a man and a woman, and the dedication of a dog who refused to let them stay apart. This story, though it's been 4 long years, still lingers in my heart. The dog that appeared, the old jacket, and the memories that came flooding back with each step, all felt like an undercurrent of emotions, intense and unresolved. Every moment of this tale is not just a journey to uncover the truth, but also a journey to rediscover oneself, to face the things thought to be lost forever. And, like all great mysteries, this story shows us that sometimes the truth isn't something you search for. It's something that finds you. If you've felt the emotional roller coaster, the unexpected twists in this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a future story. There are many more mysteries waiting to be uncovered with us. Let's continue this journey together, because this story is far from over.